Aarav thought he was marrying the love of his life. Priya believed she could hide her darkest secret. Richard, the proud father, carried desires too dangerous to confess. On a wedding night meant for celebration, their lives collided in betrayal, passion, and blood, ending in a double murder no one saw coming. The wedding of Aarav and Priya was more than just a union of two people. It was the blending of cultures, traditions, and dreams. Aarav, a young Indian man who had made his home in Australia, had always been close to his family, and bringing his bride from India was a moment of immense pride. The wedding was planned with meticulous care, combining the richness of Indian rituals with the elegance of modern Australian celebrations. Guests arrived from far and wide, dressed in bright silks, crisp suits, and shimmering jewelry. The venue was decorated with fresh roses, golden drapes, and dazzling lights that gave the night an almost magical glow. Everyone admired Priya as she walked gracefully into the hall, her red bridal attire shining under the chandeliers. She looked like the perfect bride, radiant with charm and modesty, and Aarav stood beside her with a smile that revealed his happiness. Family members clapped, laughed, and danced, convinced they were witnessing the start of a beautiful story. Cameras flashed to capture every smile, every embrace, and every whispered blessing. The air was filled with the aroma of spices from the feast, and the sound of traditional music mixed with the laughter of children running around. It felt as though nothing could disturb the joy of that evening. To all who attended, it was a fairy tale celebration, the kind that families cherish for generations. Yet behind the beauty and celebration, a hidden truth lingered, silent and dangerous, waiting for its moment to surface. No one suspected that the perfect wedding they were witnessing would soon be remembered for something far darker, something that would turn joy into horror before the night was over. The dream of a perfect marriage was destined to collapse before it even began. Richard was a man who seemed to have everything. In the eyes of his family and community, he was the definition of success. Years of dedication had built him into a wealthy businessman, respected not only for his achievements, but also for his charisma. He carried himself with confidence, the kind that made people trust him instantly. At social gatherings, Richard was often the center of attention, telling stories of his travels, sharing advice, and offering help to those in need. He was admired by friends, cherished by relatives, and adored by his son Aarav, who saw him as a role model. To the wedding guests, he appeared as the proud father, standing tall beside his son on the most important day of his life. He greeted everyone warmly, ensuring the event ran smoothly and that every guest felt welcome. His tailored suit, polished shoes, and calm demeanor reflected a man who had everything under control. People whispered about how lucky Aarav was to have a father so dedicated and generous. Yet beneath Richard's polished exterior lay secrets that no one would have guessed. Behind his warm smile were desires he carefully hid, desires that contradicted the image he had built over decades. His ability to maintain this double life was as impressive as it was dangerous. While the guests celebrated and toasted to the future, Richard's gaze occasionally drifted, revealing a flicker of something only one other person in the room understood. No one could have imagined that beneath his carefully crafted reputation was a storm waiting to break. To the world, he was an admired father and a respected man. But in the shadows, Richard carried the weight of choices that would soon destroy the very family he worked so hard to build. The connection between Priya and Richard had not begun with grand intentions, but with small, seemingly harmless moments. During Aarav's visits to India, Richard had often accompanied him, eager to reconnect with his roots and meet the family of his future daughter-in-law. It was during these visits that Priya and Richard first found themselves in quiet conversations, separate from the laughter and bustle of family gatherings. What started as polite exchanges gradually grew into something neither of them had expected. Richard was drawn to her intelligence and the way she listened with genuine interest, while Priya found herself captivated by his charm and the maturity that set him apart from men her own age. At first, their connection was nothing more than stolen glances and brief encounters, but over time, the attraction deepened into a dangerous bond. Meetings became more deliberate, hidden away from curious eyes. A spark that should have been extinguished quickly was instead fed by secrecy, making it burn brighter. Both knew it was wrong, Yet they convinced themselves they were simply sharing a harmless closeness. But soon, whispered conversations turned into physical affection, and the line between temptation and betrayal vanished completely. Priya, engaged to Aarav, found herself living two lives, one as a devoted bride-to-be and another as the secret companion of her future father-in-law. Richard, despite his age and reputation, surrendered to the passion that clouded his judgment. Every meeting carried the thrill of danger, but also the risk of exposure. What they failed to see was how fragile their secret truly was. As the wedding day drew closer, the weight of their hidden affair grew heavier, pressing against the fragile fabric of their carefully constructed lies, waiting for the right moment to tear it apart. The day of the wedding arrived like a festival, filled with laughter, music, and celebration, but beneath the joy was an invisible current of unease. Richard moved through the crowd like the perfect host, shaking hands, smiling for photos, and offering kind words to every guest. Yet whenever his eyes landed on Priya, there was a heaviness in his expression, a flicker of longing that he quickly disguised. Priya, wrapped in her red bridal attire, avoided looking directly at him, fearing that even the smallest glance might betray the secret they carried. Her heart raced each time she felt his presence nearby, a silent reminder of the choices she had made. Aarav, unaware of the storm building around him, glowed with happiness. He danced with his friends, embraced his family, and looked at his bride with pride. To him, the day was perfect, the kind of moment he had dreamed about since childhood. His laughter filled the hall, covering the hidden tension that lay just beneath the surface. Guests clapped, music thundered, and blessings were offered, but in the shadows, Richard and Priya carried a fear that no one else could sense. Every ritual felt like a performance, every smile forced to hide the truth. As the ceremony reached its peak, Richard stood silently, his thoughts torn between pride for his son and the dangerous desire he struggled to bury. Priya's hands trembled as she exchanged vows, the weight of her double life pressing against her with unbearable force. The wedding looked flawless from the outside, yet behind the sparkle of lights and the cheers of loved ones, cracks were forming. The silence between Richard and Priya was louder than the music, a dangerous quiet that hinted at the disaster waiting to strike. After the long day of rituals and celebrations, the wedding night was meant to be a time of peace and intimacy. The guests had retired to their rooms, the music had quieted, and only the faint hum of the city lingered in the background. Aarav and Priya returned to the bridal suite prepared especially for them, decorated with flowers and lit by soft golden lamps. To anyone else, it looked like the perfect setting for the beginning of a new chapter. Yet the air was thick with unease, a silence Priya could not shake. While Priya stepped away to change, Aarav picked up her phone from the table absent-mindedly. What began as a casual gesture turned into the start of a nightmare. A notification flashed across the screen, revealing a message she had forgotten to delete. Aarav opened it, and as he scrolled through the thread, his world collapsed around him. The words were unmistakable, intimate messages, confessions of love, and plans whispered between Priya and his father. At first, Aarav felt frozen, unable to believe what he was reading. His chest tightened, his breathing grew heavy, and his hands trembled so violently the phone nearly slipped. With each message, the betrayal became clearer. The woman he had married that very day was not only unfaithful, but her secret lover was his own father, the man he had admired and respected his entire life. The realization struck like a knife, turning joy into fury. His mind raced with confusion, anger, and heartbreak. Every smile, every ritual, every promise exchanged hours earlier felt like a cruel lie. In that moment, Aarav's dream of a perfect marriage shattered, leaving only rage and a burning need for confrontation. The night of celebration was about to become a night of horror. The confrontation began in silence, charged with emotions too heavy to contain. Aarav, clutching the phone in his hand, sought out his father with eyes filled with betrayal. When Richard entered the room, the air thickened instantly. Words were exchanged in anger, each sharper than the last, their voices rising in the stillness of the night. Years of admiration and respect disintegrated within minutes, replaced by a storm of rage and disgust. Aarav demanded answers, while Richard struggled to defend himself, torn between shame and denial. The tension escalated quickly, like a fire feeding on dry wood. The argument turned physical when Aarav, unable to control his fury, lunged at his father. Richard fought back, his strength surprising for his age, but anger gave Aarav an edge that overpowered reason. In the heat of the struggle, Aarav seized a sharp object from the nearby table. With a single violent motion, years of trust and family ties ended in a pool of blood. Richard collapsed, his lifeless body a chilling reminder of the secret that had destroyed everything. Priya, drawn by the commotion, entered the room at that very moment. Her eyes widened in horror as she saw Richard lying on the floor, blood spreading across the carpet. Before she could speak, Aarav turned on her, his grief twisting into uncontrollable rage. The betrayal of his wife cut as deeply as the betrayal of his father. In a blur of violence, Priya became his second victim, her wedding attire stained with the same crimson that marked the end of Richard's life. The suite, once decorated for love and joy, was now drenched in death. In a single night, the dream of a future had turned into a nightmare, leaving only silence and two bodies on the floor. The hours that followed were drenched in silence, broken only by the pounding of Aarav's heart. The once vibrant suite, filled earlier with flowers and laughter, now reeked of blood and fear. He sat motionless on the floor, his clothes torn and stained, staring at the lifeless bodies of his father and bride. The reality of what he had done pressed down on him like a crushing weight, yet his mind refused to accept it fully. Every second stretched endlessly, each tick of the clock echoing like a cruel reminder that there was no turning back. Outside the room, the wedding venue was quiet. Guests had fallen asleep in their rooms, blissfully unaware that tragedy had already struck. The faint remnants of music from earlier still lingered in the air, a haunting contrast to the horror behind the closed door. Aarav thought about escaping, about running far away, but the thought of leaving the bodies behind paralyzed him. He attempted to wipe his hands, but the stains only seemed to spread, a mark of guilt he could never wash away. Hours passed in a haze of shock and panic. He tried to drag the bodies, fumbling with the weight, but his strength gave out. Every movement seemed louder than thunder, and every shadow in the room felt like an accusing stare. The blood-stained carpet beneath his feet reminded him that the joyful celebration had turned into a nightmare. As dawn approached, exhaustion set in. Aarav collapsed into a chair, trembling, his mind replaying the betrayal and the violence in an endless loop. The silence of the night had grown unbearable, replaced now by the soft sounds of morning outside, while inside, the suite remained frozen in horror, holding the darkest secret of all. Morning light spilled into the house, breaking through the curtains and casting an almost cruel brightness across the blood-stained room. The once celebratory venue stirred awake with the sounds of guests preparing for breakfast, unaware of the horror waiting to be discovered. A maid was the first to knock on the bridal suite door, carrying a tray of food meant for the newlyweds. When no answer came, she pushed the door open, only to drop the tray in shock. The sight of Richard and Priya lying lifeless on the floor, their clothes soaked in crimson, froze her in terror. Her screams echoed through the hallways, sending panic rippling through the household. Guests rushed to the scene, their laughter and chatter turning into cries of disbelief. Some collapsed, others covered their faces, unable to look at the gruesome sight. The air filled with chaos, and in the middle of it all sat Aarav, pale and hollow-eyed, his hands still trembling from the night before. He did not try to run. He did not try to speak. He simply stared into nothing, as though his spirit had already left him. Police arrived quickly, pushing through the crowd of devastated relatives. The celebration hall, which only hours earlier had been filled with joy, was sealed off with yellow tape. Officers led Aarav away in handcuffs, his head bowed, his wedding attire torn and stained. Cameras from the press soon followed, flashing relentlessly, capturing the fall of a family once admired. News of the tragedy spread across two nations, shocking communities in India and Australia alike. What was meant to be remembered as a union of love became a cautionary tale of betrayal, passion, and violence. A wedding night that should have marked a beginning instead ended with a family destroyed forever.